So at first, when I thought of I'll do distorted reality, I started thinking about it, and I thought this is going to be a really simple demo because this is not a very complicated or hard game. But the more I started really trying to figure it out, I realized there's a lot more to it than I thought. So I'm going to share with you some of the things I found. So you should be able to see my logic screen now, yeah? Yes? Okay. So here's what I'm going to show you first. I've got a couple of things set up here. One is what is distortion? What does it actually do? And in most cases, distortion happens as a result of clipping, right? So you overdrive something and it clips and you get that sound of distortion. That's not always a bad thing. Sometimes you do that on purpose. I mean, guitar players do that all the time on purpose because it makes it a cool sound. So sometimes you want it, but sometimes you don't. And the kind that you don't want is the kind that comes from you not setting up your gain structure correctly. And depending on what your situation is and what you're listening to, you could have some clipping going on that you wouldn't notice because you're not looking in the right place, and your meters wouldn't tell you because you're not looking at them. And so you only have your ears. And I can't tell you how many shows I've gone to, student shows in particular, where I've shown up and I've started listening, and within the first couple of minutes of whatever's going on, I'm hearing all these mics clipping. They're distorting because they're clipping like the wireless packs, and you get that distortion. And like if it clips the pack, the wireless transmitter pack, it doesn't necessarily show a clip on your mixing console because it clipped the actual transmitter. And so the signal's not technically clipping at your console, but it's clipping at the pack, and you're getting all this distortion. And the only way you know is if you hear it. So being able to hear this is really important and really valuable. So let me first show you what happens, because I think that this is interesting. So I just have, I'm going to do it with a sine wave first. So I've just got a little 1 kilohertz sine wave. I've got it turned down pretty quiet, so hopefully it's not killing you here. And I have this little metering plugin going up here. So I've got a spectrum view here where you can see just sort of that sine wave peak there at 1 kilohertz. And then across the bottom here is a spectrogram that's showing you, a color for every frequency that's in this. And right now we just have one single line because we only have a pure tone. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to overdrive this sine wave. I've got just a little distortion plug-in here. So if I turn it on, look what happens. Okay, so I suddenly get all these other frequencies. Why does that happen? Why does that happen? Is because of distortion. Well, so let's take a look at that. So when you clip something, it takes something that used to be, it used to have kind of if you graph the amplitude of a regular sound wave, it has a curve to it, right? Well, when you clip it, the peak of that gets chopped off. The reason we call it a clip is because whatever level you're trying to send it to, there's a limit to how loud you can make something in any circuit, analog or digital. And if you try to take it past that, then that circuit just stops, right? It just stops turning it up, and all that energy just gets chopped off, okay? And it creates essentially a square wave. And a square wave is created using a whole lot of harmonics. So let me show you here. I'm going to take the same oscillator and go from a sine wave to a square wave. And look what happens to my spectrum view. Oh, look at that. It's like the exact same harmonic pattern that I had when I activated my distortion plugin. And you see how I've got all these other lines here for the same harmonics in the spectrogram. It's basically the same thing. So that's what's happening when you're clipping something, is you're creating square waves. And square waves are created using lots of harmonics. So when you clip something, you suddenly get this rich harmonic signature that you didn't have before. And so that's why it sometimes gets described as being really crunchy or crispy, because you hear all these high frequencies, really high frequencies, suddenly going wild, and they weren't before. Let's compare it again using the distortion plugin. You see, I get that same. So the only thing is with the distortion, I'm getting more harmonics than I was getting with the square wave. So there's a little bit more going on here, but it's the same basic concept. Okay, so that's the first thing to understand, is that distortion is the result usually of clipping, and clipping creates square waves, and square waves create harmonics. So what you're listening for when you're trying to listen for distortion is you're listening for that harmonic pattern that suddenly jumps out that didn't used to be there anymore. You usually don't hear distortion at low frequencies. You usually hear it at high frequencies, because it's the high frequencies that get introduced that weren't there before. Okay? It's not that you can't clip a low frequency, you can. It's just that clipping a low frequency creates high frequencies. Okay? So I have now some samples from distorted reality that I want to listen to and see if we can figure out what the difference is. So I've got my little plugins here. And let me get this one too. I want this one. There we go. Okay, so the first thing to notice is the top track here is the less distorted sample. So, because that's an important thing to understand about distorted reality, is they don't say that one is distorted and the other isn't. They just say that one is more distorted than the other. Okay? And sometimes I've noticed you get two samples where both are distorted. And you're basically just trying to guess which one is more distorted. Okay? So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's not that one is and isn't and the other isn't. They could both be. Not always, but sometimes. So the samples on the top are the less distorted ones, and the samples on the bottom are the more distorted ones. So the first thing you should notice is that the more distorted sample, which is this one at the bottom, it doesn't have as high of peaks. You see the difference there? So those peaks have been clipped. And this actually looks, without listening to it, this bottom one kind of looks like a signal that has been compressed or limited. And that's another clue that's going to come in really handy in a little bit when we start looking at the higher level sounds in distorted reality, is that in some ways, if the distortion is subtle enough, it sounds actually more like compression than distortion. So that's the first thing to notice. Without even listening to this, you see that we have a dynamic range difference between these two samples. So now let's actually listen to them. So I'll start with the less distorted one, and we're going to just look at our graphs here and see if we can figure out what's different about these two. So you'll be able to see the graphs for both, but we'll only hear one at a time. So this one on the left is the less distorted, and the one on the right is the more distorted. So one thing to notice, well, actually, let me let you listen to the more distorted. So that's got more distortion. That's got less distortion. Okay. All right. So the thing to notice here is the biggest difference I can see is, you see how on this less distorted one there's this gap here in the spectrum view where there's nothing going on above 16 kilohertz? And then over here in the more distorted one, I have stuff happening above 16 kilohertz. That's a classic sign of some distortion because we're creating those high frequency harmonics. It's harder to see with the spectrum view, but you can kind of see here that you've got over here this dark band where nothing's happening. But then here you've got this little bit of blue that's coming in at those really high frequencies. Okay, so that's one thing that's happening. So let's unmute this and listen to this again. So less distorted, more distorted. And hopefully you can hear those high frequencies getting all crunchy, right? So not only is this less dynamic, but you've got that high frequency energy that's really kind of gone wild a little bit. Okay, so that is like, stage one of a level 1 distorted reality sample. Okay, so like that's the first kind of example that you would be given in distorted reality when you just start the game. Should be a pretty easy one to hear. So this would be stage 2. So this is the less distorted, more distorted. It's the same deal. You see that high frequency energy above 16K suddenly really wild? Now, in reality, there's more than that going on, right? Over here in the more distorted one, there's other high frequencies down here that are going wild. It's just harder to see them because they're just getting mixed together with all the other stuff. But it's just how it happens. Those really high frequencies show up on the scope really well. So let's just A/B these again for a second. Less distorted, more distorted. Okay, so hopefully you can hear that high frequency harmonic stuff going on. Now here, this would be like stage 3 of a level 1 distorted reality. Less distorted, more distorted. Again, high frequencies going. Yeah, and you can kind of see it again here in the spectrogram, those peaks going up here at those really high frequencies. Less distorted, more distorted. Okay, so those are the two things that I'm listening for when I'm doing distorted reality. I'm listening for the dynamic range. So you get less transient. The peaks don't jump out at you as much. So overall, it sounds more compressed. But you also get that high frequency energy that just gets really messy. Okay? So those are the two things. Don't listen for the overall level. Okay? Because it could be that the distorted one sounds quieter because overall it's been kind of compressed. Sometimes the distorted one might sound louder because it got overdriven a little bit. So don't pay so much attention to the level difference between the two. Pay attention to the dynamics and the high frequency energy. Okay? So let me flip over here to SoundGym and let's play one now. So let me log into my other account so we can do level 1. All right, so as we play it, let's review the keyboard shortcuts first. So you could do this one almost completely without your mouse. So Q and E allow you to toggle between which sample you're listening to, and then A and D allow you to select which one you think is more distorted. And then F still turns on and off the sound effects, V still turns on and off the volume, and Enter still starts and ends the game. Spacebar in this case is another way to select the highlighted answer. So if you're toggling between which one you want to listen to, if you want to select the one you're listening to right now as the correct answer, you hit the spacebar. I don't usually do that though. I usually just use the A and D. Okay, so let's try it now. Okay, so this one on the left is relatively clean. And hopefully on this one on the right, you can hear that high frequency got away from us, right? Got all that high frequency crunchy stuff. here's one little sort of complaint I have about distorted reality is how many samples they give you that have distortion in them to begin with. And then they add distortion, and it's like, wait a minute, like there's a distorted guitar in here. And so don't get distracted by that. So the more distorted one is the one on the right. Okay, so this one on the left sounds pretty clean. This one on the left has all of that crunchy, high frequency stuff going on again. But also listen to the dynamic range. Listen to the percussion. You hear how tight it is on the sample on the right, and how messy the percussion gets now on the one on the left. It's almost like you're playing the Dr. Compressor game, right? So the one on the left is definitely the more distorted. Okay, so that's just another tip. Listen not only for that high frequency distortion, but listen for the dynamics, because a distorted sound is a compressed sound. Okay? Okay, so the one on the right sounds pretty clean to me. The one on the left, you can hear like that. Hear how the bass suddenly has high frequency energy where it didn't here? That electric bass, you hear mostly the low end here, but then you go over to the left one, and you're suddenly hearing high frequency stuff with the bass. It's because it's getting distorted, okay? So it's definitely the one on the left. Okay, this one on the left sounds pretty clean again. On the right, there's that bass getting, getting that high frequency energy on it. It almost sounds like, I guess they are hitting a hi-hat with the bass. But like if you listen to it just the right way, it almost might sound like the distorted one, they're hitting the hi-hat harder. Right? Because that high frequency energy that from the distorted bass is blending in with the hi-hat. So it's definitely the one on the right. Okay. So here's an example of one where both sound a little bit distorted to me. I think the one on the right is the more distorted, but the one on the left, I'm hearing something distorting. I don't know if it's on purpose or not. If they purposely made these both distorted, or if the source material has some distortion on one of the instruments, but don't get distracted by that. So yeah, listen to the guitar. Okay, you hear how that harmonic signature of the guitar strumming suddenly gets all really messy? It's because of the distortion. All those high frequencies suddenly are, really messing up that guitar. So the one on the left, relatively clean. The one on the right, that strumming is just getting really messy. It's because of the distortion. Okay, this is a classic example of one that sounds like compression. Okay, so listen to this one on the right. Listen to the percussion. Now the one on the left. It sounds like I compressed the drums. Right? The tails of all the drums sound longer. Okay? They're getting chopped off. It's distortion. So, okay, listen to the backup singers. Okay, on the one on the right, you can hear that their harmonies are blending really strangely on the one on the right compared to the left. You can just barely hear that distortion on the backup singers. I hear it mostly. Okay, yeah, listen to the bass again. It's interesting because this is a bass that has distortion naturally on it. Okay, this one on the right sounds like it got compressed, right? The whole track got compressed. The bass tails are longer now. Ah, distorted guitar already. This is going to be a hard one. Okay, it's the one on the left. Listen to the right one. Now I'll go to the left one. So that sounds kind of like compression, right? So that the distorted guitar, it got louder, but the tails got longer as well. All right, listen to the bass. This is the one on the left right now. Now I'll go to the right. You hear that high frequency energy coming in on the bass over here on the right? It wasn't there in the other one. Yep, it's definitely on the right. All right, I got 2 more to go, and then I'm going to win. Yeah, so it's the one on the left, but listen to the bass. You hear how the harmonics of the bass suddenly went wild on the left? All right, last one. Let's see if we can do it. Yeah, so the one on the right, it's getting louder overall. Don't get distracted by that. Still listen to the harmonics, the high frequencies. Okay, listen to that bass. I'm getting that high frequency again on the one on the right. Here's the left. Yeah. Okay, we did it. All right, so that's level 1 of distorted reality. Now let's take a look at what a higher level looks like. So I'll log into my other account here, and let's see. No, I want this one. I don't remember what level I'm on. Let's see. Okay, I'm on 27. So let's take a look at what 27 looks like in Logic here. So I took some samples out of it. So here's some examples. Let me get this loop so it's not completely maddening. Okay, here we go. So same deal. Let's listen. Let's just pull these up. I'm going to let us listen to the less distorted one, and let's look at the meters for a minute. Okay, this is I hate this sample, because it's got that awful distorted bass. Like, it's already really distorted. How am I supposed to hear distortion on something that is that distorted already? It drives me nuts. Okay, sorry. Here we go. Okay, we're still getting some extra energy up here at these really high frequencies, yeah? Just a little teeny tiny bit. So let's toggle them now. This is the distorted one, the extra distorted one. This is the original. So it's really hard to hear the difference there. I'm not hearing distortion as so much as I'm hearing compression. Okay? So look at the difference between the two. The peaks of that snare drum are lower on the more distorted one. So generally, this thing is going to sound slightly more compressed. You're not going to hear that really high frequency distortion signature anymore when you get to the higher levels, because it's like maybe 1% distortion. It's hardly anything. And quite frankly, I'm not entirely convinced that whatever those little high frequency artifacts that are coming in at 1% distortion, I'm not convinced that they are making it through the MP3 compression for the web page. So I have a suspicion that a lot of this really subtle distortion that we're supposed to be listening for got filtered out by the MPEG compression, because it's getting, the MP3 compression thinks it's getting masked by other things, and so it doesn't bother rendering it as much. I think that's part of the reason why it's so hard to hear it at these high levels. I can't prove that because I don't have access to the source files. All I can do is hijack the audio off the website as it plays, but I have a sneaky suspicion there that we're not hearing it at all because it's getting lost. All that harmonic stuff is getting destroyed by the MPEG compression. I think. It's my opinion, but I think I'm right. So let's listen for it again, and all we really can listen for here is the dynamic range. So here's the less distorted one. Now I'll switch. Oops. So the only thing I can really hear there is the tail of the snare drum. On those snare drum hits, it sounds different on the one that is supposedly more distorted. So let's listen to it again. So here's the original. And then here's the distorted one. Okay, you hear how the snare drum tail just gets ever so slightly messy. That's the only thing I can hear. That's the only way I would know that this is different. All right, I'm going to skip to the last one here. This would be like the stage 12 sample of level 27. Okay, so I'll solo the less distorted one, and let's just look at the graphs. There's that awful distorted guitar again that I hate. Okay, I can't see any difference between these two sets of graphs. And if I zoom in on the waveforms, so let's look at one of these peaks. Okay, here's one. Oh, I've got them slightly out of alignment. Let me line this up here. Okay, so let's just go in on one of these supposedly loud things. Let's see that because if this really is distorted, we should be able to see it. We should be able to see it get clipped. I don't see it. Okay, look at this. I'm going to drag my cursor along this waveform. I don't see I mean, there's a ever so slight difference there maybe. But whatever distortion is in here, it is ridiculously subtle. And I really think a lot of it got filtered out with the MPEG compression. So what are you listening for? I don't know. Let's listen to the distorted one and see. So this is the supposedly less distorted one. I'll switch over now. The only thing I can hear is, again, an ever so slightly messy tail on the snare drum, on that one that's supposedly more distorted. It's the only thing I can hear that's different. So let's listen to it again and see if you can hear it. This is the less distorted. Now I'll switch. Okay, I don't know if you can hear that, but the tail of the snare drum is just ever so slightly, messier on the more distorted one. It's the only thing I can hear. Okay, here we go. I think it's the one on the left. I'm hearing just ever so slightly extra high frequencies. I think it's the one on the right. Listening to that bass again, I hear a little bit of extra high stuff. Yep. So the problem here is that bass is already distorted, right? So that's making it really hard to hear the extra distortion. I really don't know. I think it's the one on the left. It sounds just a little bit more compressed to me, but I really am not confident. Okay, got it. I think it's the left again. Sounds ever so slightly compressed to me. But again, I wasn't hearing distortion at all. I was hearing compression on that one. So I think it's the one on the right, just because of the tail of that snare drum. Let's listen again, see if you can hear it. There's a difference between the snare drum on the two. I can't figure out which one is different because of distortion, but there's definitely a difference. I actually think it's the left. The tail on the left sounds longer to me. Let's see if I'm right. Yes! Okay. So listen to the cymbal right at the end of this loop. I can't be positive, but I think the one on the right, that tail of that cymbal sounds just a little bit longer. That's my guess. Let's see if I'm right. Yes, I got it. But again, I'm listening for compression, not distortion here. I think it's the left one. Listening to that snare drum tail again. It sounds just a little bit messier on the left. So same thing, that cymbal that's right at the end sounds just a little bit longer on the left, I think. Let's listen to it. This is the right. Okay, now I'll go to the left. Very, very subtle. I think it's the one on the left though. I got it! Okay, I think it's the one on the left again. Listen to the snare drum. So this is the right. Really clean, right? Really tight. Now let me go to the left. It's ever so slightly less tight and clean. Go back. Oh, I was wrong. It's getting hard. I might not. This might be my limit on this one. I think it's the one on the left. Listen to the bass. This is the one on the right, the bass. Now on the left. The high frequency gets a little bit louder on the bass, I think. Listen to the bass drum, the kick drum. I'm on the right now. You hear how that kick drum gets a little messier on the left? I think it's because it's getting distorted ever so slightly. I think it's the left one again. Now I don't know. I might be hearing a little bit of harmonics on the bass on the right. I'm not sure though. That's my best guess, is the right though. No, I'm wrong. Okay, last life. I don't think I'm going to win this level. I think it's the left, just the percussion sounds more compressed. I think it's the left, the bass. I'm hearing some really high frequency on the bass. It's wrong. All right, there you go. Well, I got to stage 10 at least. I was within 2 or 3 right answers of getting that thing. So hopefully you can kind of see the strategy there. You know, the main idea is that you've got to, at the first levels of this, you're listening for that high frequency energy, that harmonics that really get out of control. And then when you get to the higher levels, you're basically listening for compression. And subtle compression at that. There's really not a whole lot going on there. Well, thanks everyone. Hopefully this was helpful. This is one of those ones that just gets really, really hard when you get to the higher levels, kind of ridiculously so. So, you know, do your best. All right, well, I'll see you next week. I think next week I'll do Reverb Wizard, and we'll see if we can think of some tricks for that. All right, bye.